Hello, everyone. I'm Heath Fox, Executive Director of the La Jolla Historical Society. Welcome to our La Jolla Landmark Group webinar series, La Jolla Landmarks 2020. This series brings together the researchers who prepared the reports for homes that were historically designated by the City of San Diego Historical Resources Board during the 2020 calendar year. Curated by Shona McArthur, Chair of the Society's Landmark Steering Committee, this two-part webinar series traces the architectural history of La Jolla from 1927 to 1987. Today, we'll start with homes built prior to World War II based on historic reproduction styles including English Tudor, Spanish Revival, and Mexican Hacienda, and designed by architects Florence Palmer, presented by Vonn Marie May, Thomas Shepard, presented by Shona McArthur, and Cliff May, presented by Meredith Barrett. The historians will present the story of the house and architects through a PowerPoint presentation. Following all three presentations, the owners and specialists will be available to answer your questions and provide additional commentary. A few technical details regarding today's webinar. Please note that your microphone is muted and your video camera is turned off. If you have questions, you can type them in the Q&A box. The questions will be addressed at the end of the webinar following the presentations. I would like to thank all of the presenters who participated in this project and say a special word of thanks to Meg Davis, a Historical Society board member and the producer of this series. The series would not have been possible without her expertise, patience, and thoroughness. And Meg will be moderating the Q&A portion of the webinar. We hope you'll enjoy this evening's presentations and that you'll join us on April 14th when we explore homes built after World War II in the modern and postmodern styles.
Hello, my name is Shona McArthur, and it is my pleasure to introduce you to the Reverend Nassau and Estelle Stevens house. The house likely represents the swan song of Spanish Revival design in La Jolla. It's also unusual because the current owner, Anne Craig, married into the family that acquired the house just after it was built in 1931-32. So it has maintained its essential character inside and out for almost 8 decades. In a few minutes, Mrs. Craigs will give you a tour of the house. So what makes this home a landmark? The City of San Diego's Historic Resource Staff and Board must be shown that a property meets one or more of the following criteria. Is the site significant to the community's overall development? Was there a person or event tied to the site that was important to local, state, or national history? Or is it an outstanding example of style, design, and craftsmanship? Or is it the work of a master architect, designer, or craftsman? In our case, this is a Spanish Revival design by Thomas Shepard, a master architect. The house is situated on the coastline, indicated here on the right on this 1930 map taken from the La Jolla Journal. Imagine 1930 La Jolla. The town was at the peak of a building boom. In 1924, with the completion of the San Diego Electric Railway into the La Jolla Village, indicating green on this map, there was a boom in real estate, speculation, and construction, resulting in major subdivisions like Upper and Lower Hermosa, the Barber Tract, South La Jolla, the Muirlands, and lots were being sold and homes going up everywhere. By 1930, the country club and golf course were open. The beach and yacht club, today the tennis club, were under construction. The first library and buildings in the village were going up. This untouched paradise was becoming touted in San Diego papers as the new Riviera. The Stevens house is tucked into the hillside. If you notice a resemblance to houses tucked along the coast of Spain and France, you are correct. The varied roof forms, different heights, are similar to that seen along the hillsides of Spain and France. Architects arriving to serve the new populations of Southern California were educated. Many of them lived or had studied in Europe, but were developing what was called the California style. unique regional forms drawing upon our Spanish heritage of the mission and Hacienda architecture. They brought the old world to the new, designing for this seaside with its clarity of light and essential sunniness. We're fortunate to have the Thomas Shepard original drawings for the house. The 3 levels include the central living area and upstairs bedrooms and lower level for servants. Shepard specified every detail of the design, right down to such things as the decorative wrought iron grille seen at the top right. These drawings and early photographs are important to helping us with historic designation. The vocabulary of Spanish Revival can be seen in these elevations. The east-facing facade, top left, is asymmetrical. There are hip and gabled roofs at varying heights with low-pitched roof lines. The barrel tile is multicolored, irregular, and there's what's called cement mudding between them. There's this thick cement that kind of oozes out. The roof line is topped by 2 tall stucco chimneys with decorative tops. The overhanging balconies have decorative wrought iron railings. And for example, the covered balcony outside of the master bedroom, you can see at the bottom left, faces to the south and the west. So the owners could sit outside, enjoy the morning sun, or sit out there in the evening and enjoy the sunset. The ornament is concentrated around the openings. The multi-light windows are deep set with simple horizontal slat wooden shutters on either side. The stucco wall surfaces are left open. They're soft, neutral tones, contrasting with their terracotta roofs and colored shutters, doors, and the green landscape. The entry gate on Amalfi Street is private. This walled entry is set on the property line, similar to homes along the Mediterranean and in Europe. There's a heavy wood plank entry gate with rivets, decorative brass studs. And the hardware is cast brass, and it has this wonderful linear detailing. And you see the hand of the craftsman. It's not perfect, you know, and this mark of the trowel on the stucco or the mark of the tool on things like the hardware are these wonderful handcrafted elements that are wonderful to see. As you enter through the gate, you have a view to the sea, and you step through a Roman arch that's echoed in the back with a small window. The stairs and wing walls are paved with saltillo tiles. In the detail to the right, you'll see that the overhanging rafter tails are decorated. The overhanging tiles are multi-length, adding this variety of visual variety and color against the blue sky. As you step into the patio, to the right is a hand-painted, tiled fountain. In the center is this wonderful motif with a little church or chapel resembling something right out of Europe. As you turn around, you face the entry door with if you can see the square in the far distance, that's actually the ocean beyond. On either side of the door are engaged fluted columns decorated at the top with a cornice and little rosettes. And centered above is a balcony, wrought iron balcony with the colored shutters. On either side of the front door are decorative stucco vents or lights that are really only serve to partially shade or cover 2 windows on either side of the door. I brought in this detail so you might notice how shadows like this palm leaf activate the stucco walls. Left blank and bare, these bare stucco surfaces are like a canvas, constantly changing with the light and the shadows being cast on them. And note the stairs up to the garage. These various levels are very similar, as if you might be walking inside a Spanish village. To the right is a close-up of the shutters, and you just see these hand-wrought, wonderful little ties to keep the shutters from closing. And as you enter the house, there's the view to the ocean beyond. This is a photo to the right of Thomas Shepard during his one of what would become many trips to Europe. He's shown with his wife, Ruth, who was the draftsman working at the Thomas Mann architecture firm when he came to La Jolla. He was born in Wisconsin, went to school at the University of Wisconsin, and attended graduate school in architecture at the University of Columbia. But where did he get this California style? Where did it come from? Well, what happened was when he arrived in California, he first worked in Pasadena with Wallace Neff. And Wallace Neff was a pioneer of the California style. His most famous home was that called Pickfair. It was the home of Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks. He grew up in Altadena on Millionaire Row. He came from a very wealthy family. In his teenage years, he had lived in Europe prior to World War I. He designed homes for movie stars and movie directors. And today there's a few of his homes. Top right, built in 1923. At the bottom, built in 1925. These are the very homes that Shepard would have helped with. And notice the balcony, top right, the curved arches, the tiled roofs, the decorative detailing around the doors on the bottom two homes. Very similar. These are design details that he would bring from the Los Angeles area. And his second job was with George Washington Smith, and I believe he came to La Jolla to work on the large Franklin Sherwood property at the north end of Windansea. And it has the same characteristics as the Stevens house, the stucco walls, a gated entry set along the property line, and these multi-level roof lines. Arriving in La Jolla in 1926, Shepard started working for Herbert Mann, who had offices on Wall Street. And with Herbert Mann, the first projects were to remodel the La Valencia Hotel. He took the apartments designed by Reginald Jones and added the tower and a lot of the Spanish detailing in the La Valencia, and also worked on the village itself in the 1930s, building the popular, beautiful bank building that's now gone, that was at the corner of Girard and Silverado Street. He built with Herbert Mann, 12 to 15 homes in Lower Hermosa. This is one of the homes. Once again, the entry gate located along the property line, and you have a compound situated behind it. Just before building the Stevens home, he built two homes just a block away on Hillside Drive with very similar characteristics of the detailed open stucco grill above windows, the entry gate. And here he's shown actually in his garden later in his life after many travels with his wife Ruth wearing a Japanese kimono robe. He was a gregarious and popular man, good with people, very active in the La Jolla community. The home was designed in 1938 after their first trip to Europe. And after the Stevens home was built, La Jolla went into the Depression, and most of the architects in La Jolla left, as Herbert Mann did. In 1932, he left for Los Angeles. Shepard would become one of the longest practicing architects in La Jolla's history. In an interview with his wife, she estimated he worked on 103 properties in La Jolla. Some 19 of these have been historically designated. When the couple died, they had no heirs. They left $2 million to the Scripps Foundation, $5 million to the YMCA San Diego, which is why we have in the village of La Jolla the Shepard Firehouse today. I would say he's one of the most important architects and an important philanthropist in all of La Jolla history. Thank you very much. And here's Ann Craig.
Okay, so welcome. Please do come in. I'd love to show you my beautiful, historic Thomas Shepard home. So as you come in, he noticed that you would see the ocean to the left, and then you would come down the staircase into this very inviting patio. The architect, Thomas Shepard, had this idea of views and sight lines. So what he did was to install this fountain, and, well, I've put in the seating area here, but as you're sitting here, you're looking through the front door, through the archway in the living room, to the ocean beyond. And of course, when you're inside, you're looking back out toward the fountain. Part of the family history is Stephen Trowbridge, who fought in the Revolution and evidently fought, according to family history, with George Washington. But he was the grandfather of Roger Pelton and Jenny Jewel Pelton, who were the people who bought this house in 1934, 3 years after it was built. They had two daughters, and their older daughter, Elizabeth, and her husband Edgar inherited the house when they died in 1970. And then my husband Roger, who was their son, and I inherited the house when they both had passed away by 1999, and we moved in 2001. And was from Poughkeepsie, New York, had a single sister who died without heirs, and when she died, all of the Victorian furniture was shipped out here, and it's still decorating the house. My understanding is that Thomas Shepard was very drawn to Italy as well as Spain, and he had not been to Italy when he designed this house, but I've always felt that the detail around the fireplace, this is certainly a god and goddess kneeling overhead, over the top of the fireplace, but also these the wonderful moldings on the ceiling. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when we go into the dining room, we can see that he actually has a Della Robbia molding on the ceiling in there. So the molding in here, and this is why I think there's an Italian feeling from Tom Shepard, is a Della Robbia. I guess cornice is the other word for it, all around the dining room. And then there are the two built-in corner cupboards, which are filled with antiques from both sides of the family, actually. The furniture in here came from the original owners, the people who built the house, who were from New Jersey, and they wanted the dining room designed around this furniture, and they shipped it out. So Shepard took that into consideration when he designed this room. So when they sold it to Roger Pelton and Jenny Jewel, they sold the furniture with it. Well, it opened originally onto a butler's pantry, and there actually is a button under the table where the hostess could press the button to call the servants. But this was the pantry where, well, we still do have some china and crystals stored, but this side is original, but we took out the wall on this side. So this was mirrored over here. And then there was a doorway right here that led into the kitchen, which we took all that out. And then across on the other side of the kitchen was another wall. So the kitchen was tiny. And out there was storage for like a root cellar and for all of your groceries and such. Again, we took down the wall, put in the chimney, the fireplace. And so we have another wonderful room to enjoy and entertain. Original intercom, so we are now down in, quote, the servants' quarters. But there is one of these in the kitchen, the garage, and in the master bedroom. And it still functions because when I was putting in the security system, the man knew the gray bar still exists, and he went out and found out how to hook it up again and make it work. And of course, the grandchildren love to talk to each other through the house when they're here.
Thank you, Shona and Ann, not only for the presentation on the background of this Thomas Shepard home, but for the guided tour as well. Next, we'll hear from Meredith Barrett.
Hi, thanks for sharing some of your time with me today. I'm Meredith Barrett, and I'm looking forward to telling you a little bit more about Cliff May and his history here in town. Over the next few minutes, we'll talk about the background that shaped his vision, how he came to have national influence well beyond his work here in the region. We'll focus some time on May's projects here in La Jolla, and we'll wrap up with a peek at where he went after he left us. A true San Diegan, Cliff May was born here in 1908 and grew up with deep family links to the Estudillo and Pedrona families, who owned ranchos and farms in the area, including Casa de Estudillo, which many of you may know as the prototype for Ramona's marriage house in the novel Ramona. What's important about that is that May spent many of his childhood summers on these ranchos and in their adobe houses, and that was probably one of the defining determinants of his later design style. May was an avid musician as a young man and started his own jazz band playing the Hotel Del and other local venues. But then the Depression brought an end to his academic and music careers. To make a living, May began making Monterey-style furniture, and this was important because his work with craftsmen helped lay the technical foundation for his later home design and construction. A local developer, Roy Lichty, saw May's furniture and put some of it in his show homes. The subsequent rapid sale of those show homes led Lichty and another builder to fund May's own design and construction of two houses in 1932 and 1933. Coincidentally, about this time, May happened to marry Lichty's daughter, Jean. About this time, many of the architects who would come to be prominent in San Diego's history were active and would have been well aware of each other's work. For example, in La Jolla's Hermosa district, Edgar Ulrich was the designated tract architect and approved the designs in the tract of other architects, including May, Shepard, Palmer, and others. Some of the dynamics that would have influenced many of that cadre of architects were San Diego's Spanish aesthetic, an appreciation for the region's natural beauty and climate, and the local craft and trade talent. Once started, May went on a building tear, creating 50 custom and spec homes across San Diego in just the 5 years, 1932 to 1937. Among the key themes that guided his early design were following the topography, meaning that his homes hugged and followed the lots they sat on. He integrated indoor and outdoor space to expand and enrich the living areas of his homes. And he was dedicated to a rustic simplicity in design, construction, and materials. While in San Diego, May designed principally two styles. His first homes were Spanish colonial revival haciendas. Their rugged, rustic look was accentuated by smooth, stucco-on-frame construction with rounded corners, handmade terracotta roof tiles placed irregularly on the roof, deeply recessed windows and entrances with rough-hewn wooden doors, gates, shutters, and window grills. By 1934, May introduced his rancheria variation on that theme, the same core principles, but a little more sleek. Board and batten exteriors replaced stucco, shake roofs replaced tile. There were less rugged accents and more shallow insets for windows and doors. There are some common details that mark a Cliff May home of this era, and they include ceramic tile doorbell surrounds, wooden window grills often incorporating flower pot holders, and false chimneys that sit at elevation changes, and often an olive tree planted in the courtyard of these homes. The interiors will often house beehive fireplaces, show peg and plank hardwood floors, and incorporation of Batchelder tile. You see here in the slide, even in his own marketing materials, May hewed to this sort of rustic ethos. There are several May homes in La Jolla scattered across most of our early neighborhoods. Many of you are probably familiar with the ubiquitous rumors of a group of 4 tiny houses built by May to scale for the actors that played the Munchkins in The Wizard of Oz. Sadly, the story is not in fact true, but the rumor likely started because of an optical illusion that does make the houses appear shorter than normal height. The homes were all built along Hillside Drive on very shallow lots. So in order to create some separation between the house and the road, May had the homes built at below street grade. So that then created this illusion that the homes are short in height and built for smaller people. Only one of these homes remains now on Hillside Drive, and you see it here in the picture. In Lower Hermosa, and you'll see an aerial map of an early view of this tract, May built 4 homes on a single block of Avenida Cresta during the 30s. 2 of these homes were historically designated in the last couple of years, and that's where we'll spend some of our time in the next few minutes. This is a view of 6126 Avenida Cresta. This is a Spanish colonial revival hacienda built in 1936, and then May was brought back in 1985 to build an expansion of the garage of this home. The house was built well into his San Diego phase, so virtually all of his repeated elements show up in the house. Happily, the home was owned by just 4 families for more than 70 of its 80-plus years, providing a remarkable preservation of both exterior and interior features. The house was first built for Colonel O.H.B. Trenchard, a retired Royal Army engineer and Tibetan explorer. He only owned the house for about 2 years and then sold it to Bill Rule, a motorcycle enthusiast who then built a successful business selling both Harley-Davidson and Indian motorcycles, including a dealership in downtown San Diego. It was then owned by Bill Tunney, the first general manager of the newly constructed Del Mar racetrack, who also worked hand in hand with founder and owner Bing Crosby. The last owners of the home were David and Ursula Fairchild, who took great care to preserve the home. David, an American, purchased the house in the early 70s. He then, shortly thereafter, met and married Ursula in Paris. Ursula is a German woman whose family founded and owns most of Germany's largest industrial conglomerate. As a result, she's a successful businesswoman and also a professional photographer. The Fairchilds lived most of their life in Germany, but took great care to preserve this home and visited for a few months each year. When David passed away, Ursula donated the home to the Scripps Research Institute to further their the nonprofit's scientific agenda. This slide shows the original floor plan and rendering of the house, and we'll see how it hews to his core principles in many respects. So in terms of following the topography, May rarely scraped a lot and flattened it in order to then build a home. Instead, he insisted that his houses followed the lay of the land. And what that means then is there are often elevation differences from one end of the house to the other, and that's true here, where the eastern end of the house is about 12 to 18 inches higher than the far western part of the house. The way that May would accommodate this is typically to have a 1 or 2 step differential between one room to another. The structure is low to the ground, topped by a shallow pitched tile roof with deep overhanging eaves. And there are 3 false chimneys on the home that mark changes in the elevation, and that's a common touch across May's homes. With respect to bringing the outdoors in, you'll see here that May has used his classic U-shaped construction to create an interior courtyard, which is then closed off by a perimeter wall. By this point in his career, about 1936, May was giving himself license to adapt the L-shaped or U-shaped footprints that he typically employed in order to take advantage of other attributes of his lots. So for example, here in the lower right, you see that the living room is splayed at an angle, and that's so that the house takes advantage of ocean views for 2 walls of that room. Every room in the house opens onto the courtyard, or I should say almost every room, but with wide open doors and windows, and in a way that creates sort of a seamless flow from the inside, outside, and back again. The only room here that does not open to the courtyard are the maids' quarters, which you see at the lower left of the floor plan, and that room actually opens to the street. Another thing that May did in this theme is replace interior passageways with exterior corridors, again, common to the adobes of his youth. And the fastest way to move from one room of the house to another is across the courtyard or along that corridor, rather than weaving across and through the rooms of the interior of the house. Here we see more recent elevations of the home. And again, a common May feature are unornamented walls broken only by wooden windows, doors, shutters, and so on. These views give us a sense of the indoor-outdoor nature of the character that he was creating. In the upper left, you see a view from the entryway down along the brick corridor to the front door of the house. It's hard to tell in that photograph, but this is where you begin to see the difference in height. There's, again, probably about an 8 or 9 difference from the level of that entry gate to the level of the front door, and the house just flows along with that. In the picture in the middle, you get a sense of the serene courtyard he's created, his signature olive tree planted in the middle, and the deep overhangs with exposed beams and rafter tails, or rounded rafter tails. And in the bottom right, we see a view looking from the dining room out to the corridor with the 2 double doors that are fully glass paned, opening out. That door or set of doors takes up about 3/4 of that wall in the dining room. So you really get a sense of how he's really kind of bringing the indoors and the outdoors together. Here we have a look at some of the rustic simplicity that he incorporated in the homes. Again, the uneven but smooth stucco exterior, with corners rounded. You can see how deeply recessed the window is. And in that upper right picture, the little round bit there to the left of the door is that ceramic surround for the doorbell. Again, you get a sense of these heavy, rough-hewn wooden doors and portals, lintels. If you look at the bottom right, you get again a sense of these wooden window grills that are a very common element in a Cliff May home. These here wrap around a corner covering the 2 kitchen windows. As you see the roof tiles, not only would May look for handmade clay tiles, he would often purchase seconds or rejects and then have them laid irregularly to again create this sort of sense of authentic rustic simplicity in his homes. I've included a picture of the interior of the house looking through the dining room into the living room to give you a sense of some of the common interior features of a May home. You'll see at the far end the beehive fireplace, the hardwood floors, exposed beams, iron accents and fixtures, and so on. Bookending this block of Avenida Cresta is the Virginia Nucleals house, also recently designated. You'll see deep similarities between these 2 homes in terms of footprint, design, and materials. One of the things I think is worth noting here is the way that May has again used the topography to create the 2-car garage. This lot drops steeply off to the west, and rather than having the house take a significant step or steps down, May built the garage into that part of the hillside, allowing him then to extend the home out over it so that both the living room and exterior patio take advantage of stunning ocean views. This is a view of the interior of the courtyard of the home. Again, you see the stucco walls, the rustic tiled roofs, the classic olive tree that's been planted, the wooden window grills, and interestingly here, again in the lower right, you see an unglazed shuttered window built into that courtyard wall. At the middle of that same block is another Cliff May home, which is not currently designated. Again, you'll see many of the same attributes and features, but again, notice here this sort of smooth, uninterrupted wall broken only by door and window, giving nothing away about the interior of that courtyard and or home. So to recap, May was a prolific creator, building more than 50 homes over just 5 years, 1932 to 1937, while he was in San Diego. He received early recognition and acclaim for his work. Just 2 years after building his first home, when he was only 26, May's work was featured in Architectural Digest. He then moved to LA in 1938, continued designing high-end custom homes and haciendas, but his designs began to move toward a more modern simplicity and materials, although constant were a focus on single-story, indoor-outdoor living, and beginning to presage the mid-century modern movement. During his early LA years, May built a fortunate symbiotic relationship with Sunset Magazine. He designed their headquarter building, they covered his homes in their magazine, and together they published a book called The Western Ranch House, which did a lot to really sort of establish the core principles and fundamentals of his design ethos. In addition to building individual commissions, May then began to create designs for the mass production of tract homes, the classic American ranch house that we see across the country. Over 49,000 homes are attributed to either his individual commissions and or those tract designs. So this then led to his national influence, and he's pretty well known now as the father of the ranch house. And I think maybe an interesting tidbit to close on is it's worth noting that May was not a licensed architect until he was 80 years old, about a year before he retired. So pretty talented guy, pretty rich career for someone who did not carry that AIA designation. Well, thank you for your time. I hope you'll have a chance to find and see some of these local treasures.
Thank you, Meredith, for this educational presentation on Cliff May and some of the homes he designed in La Jolla. Now we'll hear from Vonn Marie May.
This is the Florence Palmer Spec House number 2 in La Jolla. It's a 1927 storybook cottage. The Tudor Revival English cottage style of 1927 was fostered during the 20s, which was a boom time in La Jolla, and all the revival styles were very popular. English Tudor, French Eclectic, Spanish Revival, many European styles were popular at the time. This is sitting in what's called the Barber Tract. It was founded by Philip Barber, a rich son of a shipping magnate back east. And he started to lay out the tract just south of La Jolla. Never really filed a map, never really boundaried it, but he just kind of bought a lot of parcels. And he had a strong group of architects and builders and friends that he used repeatedly. He built his house first, called the Dunes, but then Florence Palmer and Henry Palmer, they were Palmer and Palmer at the time, built several houses within the tract. They divorced. Their marriage only lasted about 4 years, and she went off on her own. This is one of her first pieces. This is actually a spec house. And what is a spec house? It's when someone buys the property, designs and builds the home, and then sells it right away. That was how she made her living. Just a bit of biographical information on her. She was from back east and taught at the Pratt Institute in Brooklyn. She was known best for her domestic art, and even was published in some of the finer magazines at the time. But she came west, met Henry Palmer, who was an architect in La Jolla as well, and she learned a lot from him. So she came from doing interiors and a lot of beautiful art and interior type materials, and started her own architectural firm. She was one of 4 women working in the field of architecture in the 20s in San Diego, and made outstanding contributions to La Jolla's built environment. Her design is defined as a combination of elements that create the form, plan, space, structure, and style of a property. Distinct character-defining features of the Tudor Revival exhibited in this property include 1-story massing, an irregular floor plan, steeply pitched gable roofs with flared eaves, and exposed rafter tails. This is a picture of the house in the 1930s. it was sold and resold, and many different occupants came along, but it really maintained its integrity for several decades. Over time, this photo became very important for the current owners when they had to start their restoration and the rehabilitation before its designation, so they could get designated. This photo is a photo taken by the City of San Diego consultant that did the historical home inventory in 2002. You can see that it's completely hedged. You can't really see the house. That's cut off from community view, but the survey determined that this was potentially historic, and that led the current owner to pursue designation. The house was designated under two criteria that the Historical Resources Board of the city observes. Criterion C is for architecture. The Florence Palmer Spec House #2 is significant under C, architecture, as an exemplar of the Tudor Revival style of the 1920s. Criterion D is for mastery and design. The Florence Palmer Spec House #2 is significant under D for constructing quality, attractive homes, which is attributed to her experience in homecraft and acumen as a designer. Historic integrity of a resource is determined by the ability of a property to convey its visual significance. There were several items that the current owners had to undertake to get back to its historical integrity. From that one photo that we saw before in the 30s, that was the only material evidence we had. There were no drawings, and you could only see the front elevation and the side elevation, one side. So, but that was enough because so many things had occurred over the decades, especially in the 50s. They added a new kitchen in the rear attached to the main house, out of public view, which is allowed. You're allowed to do additions as long as you follow the standards, and that's to maintain the historical view from public rights of way. One of the silly additions was a jealousy window. If you know what a jealousy window, it's that 50s glass louvered kind of Miami Beach looking tropical windows was on the front elevation. They added a single door to the front elevation. So the current owners had to take those off, take them away, and repair everything. There was a level of termite damage to a lot of the sashes in the historic windows. They replaced those. They did a good deal of renewal, you would call it, rehabilitation, restoration, and are very pleased with the result, and it qualified to be historically designated. This shows the kitchen addition in the back. And this is an interesting point that people might not understand. When you add to an historic structure, you don't want to mock it or emulate it. You want to be distinct. You want it to be of its own time because it's not historic, it's new. The fact that this has to be out of public view allowed them to have a really lovely kitchen in the back and a new deck and everything. So it's modern meets historic, which is really lovely. This is a picture that they made for the city to show them that they wanted to put the shutters back on. As you might remember from the historic photo that we had, they had been taken off. So the city approved the shutters on the front elevation, but the owners wanted to know if they could put shutters around on the side elevation. And what the city said is that since they don't know if there were shutters on that part of the house, they said, go ahead and do shutters, but don't do them the same style. Do them just enough nuance that they don't pretend like they were part of the original. So that was settled pretty easily, actually. This is the finished product, and they're thrilled with it. It's really lovely. From the time they bought it 4 years ago, they've had 2 children already. And I mentioned to them, you know, you're going to outgrow your house. And they go, no, we love our house. We're not leaving. So it's very nice to have clients that love their house. And all of the work that they did kind of made them curators of their house. They know so much about this house. So anything they do in the future, they become the experts. And this is Florence Buchanan Palmer's home and studio that she designed. This is Tudor Revival High Style. And this is exhibiting, again, her mastery. I mean, even the diamond-shaped windows and the chimneys and those wavy cedar shakes, and every little bit of detail makes this a masterful job. And this is also in the Barber Tract. Most of her portfolio is in the Barber Tract, which again proves that he had kind of a group of his favorites working within the tract. So thank you.
Thank you, Vonn Marie, for sharing the background of Florence Palmer and this home she designed in La Jolla. We're now going to transition to the Q&A portion of the webinar with the homeowners and the specialists. So please type your questions into the chat and we'll try to address some of your concerns.
Thank you, Heath. And now I'd like to invite our panelists and our homeowners to turn on their cameras and unmute themselves for the Q&A part of our webinar today. If you haven't already typed in a question, you can do that right now in the Q&A box. And before we start, I'd like to officially introduce and welcome our homeowners, Ann Craig, who you've already met today, Art Reynolds, and Marilyn Baratz, who is doing double duty of being both a presenter and a homeowner. Okay, so let's see what we've had come in for our questions. All right, so the first one is for Ann. And Ann, the question is, since your house has been in your family since 1934, how does it feel to be living in a house with 3 generations of memories and objects?
The house was originally belonged to my husband's family. I married into the family. And at age 22 in eastern part of the United States, I never said, well, where do your grandparents live? Didn't interest me at all. But in about 1965, we took a trip around the United States and happened to come through La Jolla, happened because the grandparents were here, and I had the first encounter with this house. I feel so blessed, so lucky that as the generations moved forward, that I ended up living in this absolutely remarkable house. It's a beautiful house to live in. And as I said in the presentation, I have all of these antique furnishings from Poughkeepsie, New York, that I have integrated with my sort of ethnic view. The art of my friends hangs on the walls. And during this long year of being just in this house, I have enjoyed being here. It's a wonderful, wonderful house.
That's great. Thank you, Ann. So we have a question, which is, what made you want to have your home historically designated? And were you worried it would decrease in value? And I'm going to throw that over to Art to answer.
Thank you. My wife and I bought our house in 1980, Cliff May. You just saw a little bit of it in the previous presentation. And about a year after we moved in, we had a knock on the front door on a Saturday. It was this elderly gentleman. And he said, do you mind if I come in? I built this house. My name is Cliff May. So, this is like getting Fernando Tatis to come to your front door, or George Clooney. But so he looked out in the patio, and there was this huge olive tree, which you saw on the slide. And he said, I remember when we installed that, he said he and his guys stayed or had their tools in the guest room, which is right off the courtyard. So he spent a lot of time here, 1936. However, we did not do historical designation then, and not for 40 years. What tripped us into historical designation was neighbors of ours, friends, who lived about a block away and had a beautiful old house, Spanish house, and they sold it to a developer. And the developer came in and just leveled it and put in a monstrosity that covered all the area of the old house, twice the size and none of the charm of the old house. And that did it for me. I said, we got to do something. I don't want this to happen to our house ever. So I went up to the Historical Society, and there was a woman behind a desk there, and I didn't know quite how to approach this. I said, I'm interested in historical designation for my house, but how do you judge it? And she said, well, there are a few different criteria. I mean, for example, if you have an architect who's of note, and I said, what about Cliff May? And he said, oh. So I had people coming by 2 days later to talk to me about historical designation. And it was a terrific experience to work on the designation. You get lots of support when you do it. And I think in terms of the value of the house, I recently had a realtor come by and do an estimate on what the house is worth. Pretty detailed, and I was floored. I mean, it's really kept its value and increased its value over time. So if anyone thinks, gee, I won't be able to sell my house for a lot of money if it's historically designated, that just is not true. And you also get benefits when you get your house historically designated. There's something called the Mills Act, which allows you or encourages you to restore homes and gives you a discount on your property taxes, which could range from 50 to 70%. And that's not only good while you're living in the house, but if you later decide to sell, it's a great incentive to a new owner to know that they've got a very low tax basis, which passes to them and makes the house that much more affordable and attractive.
Great, thank you, Art. And as a follow-up to that question, we had a question come in that asked, how much did the Mills Act matter in your decision to designate your home? And I thought we could ask all three of our homeowners that question. Anne, would you like to start?
It was not the most significant part of it, but it was definitely part of it. And as Proposition 13 was beginning to be challenged, to my generation, there was always one person inheriting it. I have 2 kids, so who's going to get it? And would they put it on the market? And at that point, I realized the Mills Act was very important, that it would be an incentive to purchase a house like this that would have a very high, well, I know what it's estimated for, and the taxes would be huge if I didn't have Proposition 13 and if my children couldn't have the Mills Act.
Thank you, Anne. Meredith, would you like to answer that question as well?
Sure. I think it sounds like there's a common theme here. I'd say it was probably, maybe reason number 2 for us. We've got some family history with Cliff May homes. My parents owned one in the Barber Tract, starting in the 70s. And my husband, Matt, found this house that we live in now and fell in love with it. And so for us, it was as much preserving that Cliff May legacy as anything. And then, certainly living in a market like La Jolla with the tax base or tax structure of San Diego, certainly there's an attraction to opportunity to keep those taxes low. So then pursuing the Mills Act made an awful lot of sense in that regard.
For us, it was just a icing on the cake. We loved the house since 1980, and the shock of seeing a house that we knew and loved being torn down drove us to do this, and we're so glad we did. And this was a nice fill-up, the Mills Act.
Wonderful. Thank you all. Vonn Marie, I've got a question I think would be good for you. What is the cost to get a home historically designated?
Oh, that can range depending on the complexity. Anywhere starting at about 4,000 on up, depending. So I'm speaking for myself. I'm sure other consultants have their own schedules. So.
Well, also, in Art's case, Art worked with me on writing the designation report. And so there's a base fee with the city of about $1,200, which is the application fee. And then, the homeowner can work on the application themselves, do the research. The Landmark Group is here to help. The Historical Society has wonderful resources in its archive. So this is something that people can do themselves. And we have a small fund even to help people that if they do need help with the cost, to help them with that.
Yeah, our total cost was somewhere between $2,000 and $3,000. So, that was everything included. So, given the benefits, it was time well spent and money well spent.
There's a small fee for the city's, the Mills Act application as well.
It was also a lot of fun because we found the original architectural drawings. Shona helped me hugely with all of this. And then we had to go downtown and do some research, and Shona knew how to do that. So it made it less stressful for me. It might have been stressful for Shona, but maybe not since she did it a lot. But I enjoyed doing it.
That's great. And I think we heard a little bit already from Art about how he felt the designation had affected the value of his property. But Shona, maybe you can speak a little more to that in general, how designation affects the future value of property.
Well, there is not only the tax benefit, but there's actually research has been done into the effects of designation on a neighborhood where there is a historic property. And what they've found is that if a home has been restored, that you're required, once a house is designated, to maintain it. And so you have a quality structure that's standing there, and it enhances the value of everything in the neighborhood. So as a result, the research has shown that the values generally have increased like 30% upward. Because of designation and multiple designations in a neighborhood, it contributes greatly. And one point that Heath has addressed early on, and that's important, is also the ecological aspects of saving these properties for a community, the conservation aspect. I don't know, Heath, if you want to comment any more about that, but that it's good for the environment for us not to be tearing down things, but to use the resources that we have.
Sure, I'll comment on that. When you tear down a building, all of the energy, all the carbon that went into extracting the materials and building that house, all of that is lost. And now you have to expend more energy to haul it all off to an already full landfill, pull new materials from the earth to build a new structure. And so historic designation and the retention of properties and the reuse, the adaptive reuse of those properties for modern use, it very much contributes in small ways, but very much contributes to the fight against climate change and the preservation of the environment.
Mhm. So there's a different kind of value there that's to our globe, you know, to our environment, which is, you can't measure really.
Excellent, thank you. So we have a question here, and maybe Shona or Heath or Vonn Marie might be able to answer this. A couple of people asked this. Are there any La Jolla neighborhoods or groups of houses that have been designated as historic districts?
Well, I know that Bishop School is a district, and the El Pueblo Ribera, I think, is considered a district. These are the homes by Schindler, Rudolph Schindler. I think those might be the only two districts in town. What do you think, Heath?
Yeah, I don't, there's no other residential districts in the community of La Jolla like there are in other parts of the city of San Diego. But I believe there are some good candidates for that. And
Yes.
some of those areas in the Barber Tract that you saw in the earlier presentations is one of those.
Yeah.
In the La Jolla survey, they identified several potential historic districts. One of them was Scripps Estates above Scripps Institution, and also the Barber Tract. And they're waiting.
Yes. We need to work on that.
Yes.
Shona, here's another one for you. In the California style, did the landscape artist and the architect seem to work hand in hand? The example of the palm leaf on the facade of the Shepard house was impressive.
Yeah. You know, of course, Anne Craig has a wonderful gardener that's been working with her for about 40 years, I think. But so, you know, one thing that's really fascinating I learned recently when we were working on these properties is the Herbert Palmer home about a block from Anne's is recognized as being the landscape architect of Milton Sessions, along with Herbert Palmer. And so, you know, many people know of Kate Sessions, who had the nursery downtown. Well, she had a nephew, Milton, and, you know, he actually landscaped that property. So I think that because Kate Sessions was here and had set up the nursery downtown, you know, then her nephew was active with her. I think that there were landscape people that worked on these early homes. Vonn Marie, you might have more to add to that.
No, I think you covered that.
Okay.
All right, so staying on Tom Shepard, there's a question of, can anyone tell me where Tom Shepard's office was in La Jolla?
Yes. Wall Street.
He actually had two offices, and I think it's 107 Wall Street. I've got the address if somebody.
It's still there. It's still there, intact.
Is it across from the post office?
No, it's down the street.
Down further.
All right, so then we have a few more questions here. This is a good one. How would I find out who was the architect of my 1935 home?
We could make a list. You can start with a chain of title and hopefully a notice of completion. You were required to file a notice of completion because that essentially put you on the tax rolls. Some people didn't. Some people would forget for maybe 3-5 years and then remember. But they often listed either the builder or the owner and very rarely the architect. I found one notice of completion that said Richard Requa, so he filed it. And I've done some up in Rancho Santa Fe where Lillian Rice, who always played by the rules, would file a notice of completion. And after that, it's usually in the La Jolla Light, the historical La Jolla Light or the La Jolla Journal. They were touting that so much was going on and so many buildings were going up in homes. And they would list the architect often in those articles. Sometimes when they pulled water or pulled sewer, mostly water, sometimes the architect would do it or the builder would do it.
Yeah.
You have to really just, do a deep dive It's not always obvious.
We have people who can do that with you too.
Yes, yes.
And maybe this is a good point to jump in and kind of reflect on the incredible resource that the Historical Society represents. I mean, just the collection of knowledge and expertise and resource with just a really generous spirit of sharing those resources with people in the community. I am certainly no expert on this stuff, but have just been overwhelmed by the kindness and graciousness of people like Keith and Shona and others there. And so I'd encourage anybody who's listening, who's not already a member of the Historical Society to join, not only to participate in those resources, but also the wonderful exhibits and shows that they bring forward to all of us.
Oh, great, Meredith.
And I'll just add to that and say the old newspapers that Vonn Marie mentioned, we have an archive of those old newspapers that reach back into the early part of the century that are available for researchers, in addition to a lot of land use documents, family documents, all manner of historic documents. And you can make an appointment to come in and do the research. We'll help you with that. And it's free to the public. There's no charge for doing this.
And can we make a pitch if any of you have historic photos that we can scan of any part of La Jolla? Please come forward and lend them to us, if not donate them, because the more people that contribute to the archive, the more useful it is.
Very true. Okay, here's another interesting one. Can a historical designation be based on interior details only?
Wow.
It's rare.
I don't think so.
That's odd. Usually it's the exterior, because the spirit of the Mills Act is that you're getting a tax break, but you're giving back that historical street face to the community. That was the basic premise that Senator Mills, who was from San Diego, wrote the Mills Act. He was an historian, and that was the thesis, really. But I've worked on some that wanted to be designated, but then wanted to spot designate an interior piece, such as this beautiful prairie style in Mission Hills. Inside, they had the staircase from the steamer, the Orizaba, the ship, the Orizaba. It was salvaged and put into their house. So they wanted that spot designated because it was so significant. I mean, that went back to the 19th century. So sometimes there was a church in Hillcrest, I think, that wanted their Judson stained glass windows singled out. So I think I've never seen a house just designated on an interior piece, but you can also do that with the exterior.
Here's a good one. How do I get a consultation to know if it's even worth filing an application for historic designation?
You can make a free appointment with the Historic Resource Board staff. They'll give you 20 minutes of their time. You make an appointment and you can go down with photographs of the property and any information you have on the history and chat with them about it. I think that's a really good way to start, because they are really the gatekeepers, and there's no sense in spending money on a consultant or a writer researcher unless you think you're going to get somewhere with that research. Great.
So following up on one of our earlier discussions about the chain of title, the question is, where would I find the notice of completion or chain of title?
It's in all the, it's in the miscellaneous files. It's not really in the grantor grantee files at the county recorder's office. You can hire a title company to search it for you. It's really an important document. I really try to research and get that. Not always there. Maybe 60% of the time they would have filed an NOC. So yeah, a title company would do it for you.
On the Historical Society website, under the tab for the Landmark Group, there's a PDF that you can download and print out, which is a resource for homeowners interested in historic designation. And in there, we'll tell you where to go to get the documents that you need. And there is a phone number and an email for the person down at the county offices that you can pay so much an hour. I can't quite remember how much it is. Anne, do you recall what we paid? It's a minor fee, and they will actually research the chain of title for you. So there are ways to facilitate this, and there is a handout that we have that we've published for you, and it's online that you can use.
And Shona, just for any of our attendees who don't know, could you briefly describe what the La Jolla Landmarks Group is and your role in it?
It began as a support group to the Historical Society. It just made sense that the people who own historically designated homes support the Historical Society. So that's who we are. We're the people that own historically designated homes in La Jolla. And we get together as owners of historic properties, and we do things to encourage designation in La Jolla and support it. We have a small steering committee, and it was formed in 2015. Lisa Albanez and myself, I think, got it going.
Heath, anything you wanted to add to that?
No, that covers it really well.
Okay, all right. I thought I heard you saying something.
The Landmarks Group is a great support group for the Historical Society, and a complement, works in complementary fashion to our preservation committee that does consultations with the City of San Diego Historical Resources staff and with homeowners.
They also give awards for rehabilitation and what's the other word?
Restoration.
Restoration. It's called the Jewel Award. Those two awards are given every year to houses that have brought themselves back to what they were originally.
Right. We have a small steering committee of people, Ann Craig and Art Reynolds, Susan Comden, Lisa Albanez, Deborah Duford was on it. We have a small group of homeowners that serve on the steering committee that helped organize this webinar.
Great. So here's a kind of interesting one. When a homeowner requests to raise or move a garden wall, how would you respond? I suppose that is in context of historical designation.
That's hard to say definitively, because rule of thumb is that you don't want to obscure the front elevations, or if it's a corner lot, 2 elevations. A garden wall, I think it would depend on the height, if it was opaque, many different considerations. So it's really hard to say definitively what you could do.
There are also some places in town where the height of an exterior wall is actually sort of a historic artifact itself. So for example, in Lower Hermosa, as the lots were sold, they were sold with a variety of covenants or conditions. And one of them was that exterior, garden walls could be no higher than 5 feet in height. So I think and particularly with the emphasis of the city on those exterior views, you could pretty quickly get yourself into some trouble if you were raising one of those walls, in that part of the community. So it's worth taking a look at.
Yeah, usually when a house is designated, like our house, the wall is designated also. And in Anne's case, their front gantry gate is designated, and they'll call out these things, and the historic resource staff will identify walls, and they don't, if you try to put in a wall that's going to obscure the historic building after the building was built, they won't want you to do that. They come by and look at the house every 5 years and see what you're doing to the house.
Great. Okay, well, I think that's pretty much our questions for today. I'm going to hand it back over to Heath to close us out for the evening.
Thank you, Meg. And I would like to once again thank all the presenters who participated in this evening's project and to express our appreciation to Meg Davis for producing this webinar. And many thanks to all of you, our guests, for attending this event. We hope you found it informative and engaging. And as a reminder, please join us on April 14th when we explore historically designated homes that were built after World War II in the modern and postmodern styles. If you haven't registered for this webinar, you can do so on our website at lajoyahistory.org/education. Thank you all again and have a good evening.